lecture 1 out of 4 lectures. And tonight's lecture is on the first noble truth, the nature of suffering. The structure of our talk will be beginning with a short introduction. Then we'll take a look at the significance of the 4 noble truths in Buddhism. We move on to the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. And related to the first noble truth, we will also look at 3 universal characteristics, which of course, as we said earlier, is the name of your Zoom link. And then finally, we will take a look at some teachings from Master Thich Nhat Hanh on entering the heart of the Buddha, transforming suffering into peace, joy, and liberation. Okay, so this is our structure of the talk. So let's begin with a short introduction. I'm sure many of you know that the 4 noble truths are the first teachings the Buddha delivered upon his enlightenment. Yeah, they present a summary of the Buddha's teachings in theory and practice. In discussing the 4 noble truths, our 4 talks in September will introduce some basic concepts in Buddhism and relate their relevance to our daily life. Understanding these 4 noble truths will enrich our understanding of life, giving us hope and inspiration to lead meaningful and happy lives. By penetrating the 4 noble truths, we can also realize happiness at different levels: personal and family, social and societal, worldly and spiritual, and relative or mundane, and ultimate or supramundane happiness. Yeah, so very basic teachings. Often we do all kinds of practices, and every now and then is important for us to come back to the basics of Buddhism, right? The 4 noble truths. Now let us then take a look at the significance of the 4 noble truths in Buddhism, right? We'll begin by looking at the aspect of from suffering to happiness. From suffering to happiness. Yes, the 4 noble truths, one of the most fundamental teachings of the Buddha. They were delivered during the Buddha's first discourse, known as the Dhammacakka Pavatana Sutta, or the sutta setting in motion the Dharma wheel. And this discourse was presented to the 5 monks at the deer park at Istipana, or today's Sanaf, near Bernes. So if you take a look at this map, yeah, the 4 squares represent the 4 holy pilgrimage sites associated with Buddhism. We start off with Lumbini, and that's the birthplace of the Buddha. Then we move to Buddha Gaya, and that's where the Buddha was enlightened. From Buddha Gaya, we move on to Sanaf. That's where the Buddha delivered his first discourse to his 5 disciples. And yes, that's the discourse that we're talking about, the 4 noble truths. And the 4th pilgrimage site is Kushinagara, the place where the Buddha passes on into parinirvana. Okay, now let us take a closer look at the 4 noble truths. They are, of course, the truth of suffering, the first noble truth, and that's dukkha. Second, the truth of the cause of suffering, that's samudaya. Third, the truth of the cessation or the end of suffering, that's nirodha. And then 4th, that's the truth of the path leading to the end or cessation of suffering, and that's magga. Yeah, truth, origin, end, and path to the end of suffering. the Four Noble Truths. Now, after hearing the sermon, the Buddha's sermon, the 5 monks obtained what we call eyes of wisdom and realized that everything which arises will cease. They're said to have seen the Dharma, known the Dharma, and become enlightened to the Dharma. The Dharma, of course, refers to the Buddha's teaching. And Buddhism is noted for its practical emphasis. Yeah, the Buddha states that he has always made known just 2 things, and that's suffering and the end of suffering. And this is the basic orientation of Buddhism for all times and for all places. And of course, its classic formulation is the Four Noble Truths. Well, look at this picture, yeah? We said Nirodha, that's the third noble truth, end of suffering, and then enlightenment. And you see the guy on the right, pushing along all his possessions, right? We call them attachments, yeah? Dispose of attachments. And if you can let go of our attachments, the more we can let go, the better our practice will be. Until one day when we can finally let go of all our attachments, then we are there, enlightenment. And letting go, this is what Master Thich Nhat Hanh tells us. I vow to let go of all worries and anxiety in order to be light and free. Master Thich Nhat Hanh, I'm sure many of you know him. He was born in 1926 and he passed away just recently in January this year, right? So he had a good life of 96 years. He tells us that the teaching on the Four Noble Truths is filled with joy and hope. It teaches us to recognize suffering and to transform our suffering into mindfulness, compassion, peace, and liberation. So I vow to let go of all worries and anxiety in order, right, the transformation, to be light and happy. Okay, so this is our first point, from suffering to happiness. Now let's move on to our second point. Why are the truths called noble? So why noble truths? Now, when we talk about the noble one, we are talking about someone who realizes ultimate reality. Yeah, so someone who attains enlightenment, the noble one, for example, an arahant or a Buddha. Okay. So in this context, the truths are noble because the 4 truths are fully understood, practiced, and realized by the noble ones. So this, why the truths are noble? This is a descriptive indicator, because the 4 truths are fully understood, practiced, and realized by the noble ones, by the enlightened ones. And secondly, the truths are noble because it also enables ordinary people like us to become noble ones. When we fully understand, practice, and realize the 4 truths, we can also become enlightened. We can also become the noble one. So this is an ennobling indicator, right? So this is a prescriptive understanding of the 4 noble truths. The first understanding is a descriptive, of how the noble truths are understood, practiced, and realized by the noble ones. And the second understanding is prescriptive, because if we do the same thing, we can also become the noble ones. Well, Venerable Master Sheng Yan, he has given a series of talks on the Noble Truth called Setting in Motion the Dharma Wheel. And he also shares with us why he considers the truths to be noble. Many of you probably also know Venerable Master Sheng Yan. He was born in 1930 and he passes on in 2009, 79 years old, right? When he was 79 years old. And you see here some of his devotees, two very famous ones, Jet Li and Ling Qixia, right? If you are my generation, yeah, you'll probably know them one. But most of you are much younger, so maybe you're not so familiar with them, okay? All right. And of course, Master Sheng Yan, very well known for founding Fa Kushan, right? Dharma Drum Mountain, you see here, Xingling Huanjing, yeah, as a place for spiritual training, of spiritual environment in Taiwan, of course. And yes, Venerable Master Sheng Yan, he tells us that the noble truths are noble because the truths are genuine, timeless, and necessary. Genuine because nothing can contradict, discredit, or supersede them. And when we practice them, we will experience that they are genuine. They are timeless because suffering and the end of suffering are not limited to any particular culture, society, or particular period of time. Yeah, whether it's past, present, or future, the Four Noble Truths applies. And they're necessary because to realize the end of suffering, we must practice the path that leads to it. So for Master Sheng Yan, these are the reasons why he calls the truths noble, because the truths are genuine, timeless, and necessary. Okay, now let's move on to the third aspect on the significance of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. And that is cause and effect. The Four Noble Truths provide a summary of the teaching of the Buddha in theory and practice, and it incorporates the concept of cause and effect, which of course lies at the heart of the teaching of the Buddha. Now, the Four Noble Truths has two causes and two effects. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering, is the effect of the second noble truth, the truth of the cause. And the third noble truth, the truth of cessation, is the effect of the fourth truth, the truth of the path leading to the end of suffering. So within the Four Noble Truths, we have two causes and two effects. The second and the fourth truths are the causes, and the first and the third truths are the effects. Well, the first two truths, those of suffering and its cause, belong to our world, right? Our mundane world of birth and death. So symbolically, they can be pictured in the form of a circle, because they are operating in a secular manner. The causes of suffering produce suffering, and suffering in turn produces the causes of suffering, which in turn again produce suffering. So this is the cycle of birth and death, or samsara, right? So the first two truths, those of suffering and its cause, belong to our world of birth and death, the cycle of birth and death. Now, the third and fourth truth, the truth of the end of suffering and the truth of the path, do not belong to the realm of birth and death. They can be represented figuratively through the image of a spiral in which the movement is no longer merely circular, but it is directed upward, towards another plane of experience, and that's the supramundane realm of Nibbana. So if we practice the Four Noble Truths, the path leading to the end of suffering, it will lead to the end of suffering and bring us to the supramundane realm of Nibbana. Okay, so the third significant aspect is cause and effect. Now let's move on to the fourth aspect of the Four Noble Truths in terms of a medicine analogy. We talk about in medicine, we talk about disease, diagnosis, cure, and treatment. In this regard, the Four Noble Truths also resembles these four stages in the practice of the science of medicine, disease, diagnosis, cure, and treatment. Well, the first truth of suffering corresponds to the first element of disease. The second truth of the cause refers to the elements of diagnosis. The third truth of cessation refers to the achievement of a cure. And the fourth truth of the path refers to the cause of treatment of a disease. So take a look at this picture here. This patient says, I do feel poorly. Yeah, so he's suffering. Yeah, the disease. And I hope everything is going to be okay. Just like all of us, right? We hope we can be relieved for our suffering. And then the doctor say, now let's find out what the cause is. Diagnosis. And then the doctor says, yes, there's a cure. So the patient, of course, is very happy. There's a cure. So the third noble truth, right? There's an end to suffering. And then, yes, the doctor says, only if you take the medicine. So the fourth noble truth, the path leading to the end of suffering. Okay, so the four noble truths as disease, diagnosis, cure, and treatment. Now, the starting point of Buddhist practice is the wish, the motivation to relieve the suffering of the disease and eradicate its cause. And this wish, this motivation is rooted in loving kindness and compassion for the suffering of both oneself and of others. So in this picture here, you see the Buddha treating a sick monk. Maybe you have heard of it. Yeah, the story of Tissa. All right, there's this monk by the name of Tissa, and he falls seriously ill. Because of his illness, he smells bad. Yeah, his body stinks. And then his fellow monks sort of avoid him. One day, the Buddha passes by and comes across this sick monk, Tissa, and then he notices that nobody is taking care of him. So he approaches the monk, and then he treats the monk lovingly, with care. And he tells the other monks that when you take care of somebody who's sick, you are actually taking care of me, the Buddha, right? So the motivation of wishing to relieve suffering, the motivation of loving kindness and compassion for all beings. All right, so that's the starting point of Buddhist practice. Now, the Buddha's teaching as the medicine for the disease of suffering represents a system of training in conduct, or morality, ethics, in meditation or mental development, concentration, and in wisdom, right? So it is a practical method for dealing with the reality of suffering. It is the treatment for our disease of suffering. And we'll be talking more about this when we come to the fourth noble truth. Okay, so we've looked at four aspects of the noble truths in terms of its significance in Buddhism. We started off with from suffering to happiness. We move on to look at why the truths are considered noble. Then we look at its context of cause and effect. Fourthly, the medicine analogy of disease, diagnosis, cure, and treatment. And let's move on to the fifth aspect, which is its progressive sequence. Well, there is a progressive sequence between the Four Noble Truths. And in this context, the significance of any one of the truths cannot be understood in a context where the other three truths are excluded. So each truth assumes its significance in relation to the other three truths. So they're all equally true and they're all equally noble, right? Each of the four truths. And because of their mutual relation and interconnection, they can all be seen as four aspects of one and the same proposition. Yeah. So if we start off with the first truth, it will lead us to the second, to the third, to the fourth. We can see in this sense, their interconnectedness, their mutual relations, and the four aspects of one and of the same proposition. So here, Master Thich Nhat Hanh tells us, it is important to understand the interbeing, the interconnected nature of the Four Noble Truths. When we look deeply into any one of the four truths, we see the other three. The Four Noble Truths are one. So he has written a book called No Mud, No Lotus, right? So no mud, no suffering, no lotus, no context of cultivation, no context of spiritual attainment, no context of enlightenment. So the art of transforming suffering. Now, this progressive sequence of the Four Noble Truths, the Four Noble Truths are also considered when we understand them as the basis for our actual practice. Usually we say that suffering is to be understood. We say that the cause of suffering is to be eradicated. The end of suffering is to be realized. And the way to end suffering is to be practiced through the practice of morality, mental development, and wisdom. I repeat, suffering is to be understood. The cause of suffering to be eradicated, the end of suffering to be realized, and the way to end suffering to be practiced. Okay, so we look at this chart, we have the Four Noble Truths, we understand them, we practice the Noble Eightfold Path, and that's the fourth Noble Truth. And when we practice, we understand, and we fully realize the three universal characteristics, we are there. Yeah, we have attainment. Yeah, we realized Nibbana. Okay, so the progressive sequence of the Four Noble Truths as the basis for practice to be understood, cause to be eradicated, end of suffering to be realized, and the way to end suffering to be practiced. So we have covered the five aspects on why the Four Noble Truths are significant in Buddhism. Okay? You're with me? All right? My pace is all right? Not too fast and not too slow for you. I know many of you are very knowledgeable, yeah, about Buddhism, and I'm sure the Four Noble Truths, but I think it's good for us to refresh ourselves. So every now and then on the basics, yeah, so that no matter what we practice, no matter what profundities we learn, we can all see it in context. So now let's move on to part two, the first Noble Truth, and that's the truth of suffering. Okay, here the Buddha tells us, this is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Sickness is suffering. Dying is suffering. Sorrow, grief, pain, unhappiness, and unease are suffering. Being united with what one is not like is suffering. Separation from what is like is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates of grasping are suffering. So this is what the Buddhist text tells us about the first noble truth. Well, the Pali term is dukkha, yeah, and dukkha, although we often say it is suffering, but it has a wider context, right? Wider sense. So it's suffering, it's pain, it's anguish, it's unease, it's a sense of unsatisfactoriness. Yeah. So all these kind of sentiments are included under suffering. Yeah, under dukkha, pain, anguish, unease, unsatisfactoriness. And there are three kinds of dukkha. Yeah, we talk about dukkha as ordinary suffering, dukkha as produced by change, and dukkha as conditions or conditioned states. And that's a pervasive experience depending on impermanent conditions. So let us take a look one by one at these three kinds of dukkha, right? So here first we have dukkha as ordinary suffering, and this include forms of physical or bodily suffering, as well as mental and psychological suffering. So what are physical or bodily suffering? When we talk about physical and bodily suffering, we are referring to the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death, right? Why is birth suffering? Because during the process of birth, right, physical pain is experienced for those of you who have become mothers, right? I'm sure you're very much aware of that. And probably the infant also experience pain. And birth is also suffering because it is the gate, yeah? It is the gate through which the other sufferings then follow. The other sufferings of old age, sickness, and death, right? So this is what we meant by physical or bodily suffering. Birth, old age, sickness, and death. What about mental or psychological suffering? What is this? Well, this refers to sorrow, and this is the emotional pain. Sorrow is the emotional pain from loss, from disappointment, from misfortune, right? Sorrow. We also talk about grief. And of course, that's when somebody passes away, we experience this emotion of grief. We talk about pain, unhappiness, unease. These are all aspects of mental or psychological suffering. We also talk about the suffering of contact with what we despise or things or people we don't like, but we have to be in contact with them. That's mental suffering. The suffering of separation from what is dear to us, people or things that we cherish. If we have to part from them or from these things, we also experience mental and psychological suffering. And then there's also the suffering of frustrated desires. Yeah, we have many desires, and if we cannot attain them, we also suffer. Yeah, physically, mentally or psychologically. Okay. So often because of all these kinds of suffering, yeah, we have phenomena such as depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, yeah. So suffering, the first kind of suffering, dukkha as ordinary suffering consisting of physical, bodily suffering and mental, psychological suffering. Okay, so physical, bodily suffering, mental, psychological suffering, and this can lead us to all kinds of issues in mental health, yeah? Anxiety, depression, addiction, and suicides, yeah? The second kind of dukkha is suffering produced by change. And all of us know, of course, no matter how happy and contented we may be at a particular moment, yeah, it is not permanent. When it changes, it produces pain, suffering, and unhappiness. So look at these emoticons, right? So many different kinds of emotions, yeah, that we can experience throughout the day. The Buddha also tells us that there are different forms of happiness. There's the happiness of family life, happiness of sense pleasures, happiness of attachment, happiness of renunciation, happiness of spiritual states of higher meditation. But because they're all subject to change, they are all also a dukkha, right? So this is what we mean by dukkha as produced by change. That no matter how happy and contented we are at any one time, it is not permanent. Now, the third kind of dukkha is conditions or conditioned states. because everything is impermanent, everything is anicca, the world that we live in itself is a place of uncertainty in which we can never be sure what is going to happen next. Yeah. It is a world, a place of shifting and unstable conditions whose very nature is such that we can never feel entirely at ease itself, right? So this is dukkha as conditions, conditioned states, referring to the situation of the world that we live in, the environment that we're surrounded by. Yeah, just like the changing seasons, yeah, constantly changing, the climate constantly changing. So from another perspective, we are not our own masters. We're constantly under the influence and conditioning of other forces, from the external environment to the experiences and workings of our own minds and bodies, right? So internally, our minds and bodies, and externally, our environments, many of this are due to conditions. So now, of course, we are very familiar, right? If we are talking about external environment, 2 years ago, we started off with COVID. When we thought that that's about it, we feel the impact of COVID economically, recession. We talk about climatic change. Yeah, we talk about biodiversity collapse. And on top of it, in recent months, we have war and conflicts. And of course, the most famous one being Ukraine, right? The Ukraine war. So we're all suffering from all these external factors: COVID, recession, climate change, biodiversity collapse, and the impact of the war. All right. So these conditions are other-powered because the causes and conditions that make up a particular moment are dependent on other things happening, either in the environment or in our own minds and bodies. And this is what we call dependent origination, yeah, or conditioned arising, a web of mutually interdependent causes. So in this form of dukkha, yeah, as conditions or conditioned states, it implies that dukkha is inherent in the nature of our experience itself. In other words, suffering is pervasive as long as we are in the realm of birth and death. Yeah, it means that not only is there suffering in life, but life itself, yeah, as long as we're in this world, in this cycle of life, of birth and death, it is suffering. So with this picture of this monk, the caption, life is suffering, but you see, he's at the same time also smiling, yeah? Because the Buddha also teaches us how to relieve our suffering, how to transform our suffering into happiness, how to end our suffering. Okay, so on this first noble truth of suffering, we've talked about dukkha, 3 kinds of dukkha as ordinary suffering, which includes physical, bodily suffering, and mental, psychological suffering. The second kind of suffering, dukkha, produced by change. And then the third kind of suffering, dukkha, as conditions, conditioned states, pervasive in our cycle of life and death. Now, when we talk so much about suffering, does this truth of suffering suggest that Buddhism is pessimistic? And of course, the answer is no, right? Well, let's just take a look at what some Buddhist scholars tell us about the truth of suffering. Yeah, Buddhism is pessimistic? No, let's just take a look first at the views of this venerable Wapula Sri Rahula. He lived from 1907 to 1997, so good, right? 90 years old. He has written many books, including What the Buddha Taught. Some of you may be familiar, yeah, with some of his books. He's a Sri Lankan scholar monk. Yeah, became a monk at the age of 13. He taught in universities in Sri Lanka as well as in the US. For instance, Northwestern University, UCLA. He's written many books on Buddhism, and he's founded the Buddhist and Pali University in Sri Lanka in 1982. And of course, in Singapore too, we have the Buddhist Pali and Buddhist College, right? The Pali and Buddhist College, a branch through distance learning of the Buddhist and Pali University in 1982. So this Venerable Master tells us Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. It is realistic, taking a realistic view of life and of the world. It tells us exactly and objectively what we are and what the world around us is. And it shows us the way to perfect freedom, peace, tranquility, and happiness. The Buddha is therefore the wise and scientific doctor for the ills of the world. Buddhism is opposed to the melancholic, sorrowful, penitent, and gloomy attitude of mind, which is considered a hindrance to the realization of truth. Yeah. So, and a true Buddhist is the happiest of all beings. He is always calm and serene and cannot be upset or dismayed by changes or calamities because he sees things as they are. So when we take a look at images of Buddha, isn't it? We always see him as so calm, so cool, and smiling, right? So if we practice the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, we will one day also be like the Buddha. And of course, along the way, we will also become calmer, more serene, more peaceful, more equanimous. Now, let's just move on to the view of another Buddhist scholar by the name of Karunadasa. He's born in 1934, and so he's 88 years old now. He has written many texts, and one of the famous texts is called Early Buddhist Teachings. Yeah, he obtained his PhD in London, and then he also taught at universities in Sri Lanka and in the West. And for many years, he also taught at the Center for Buddhist Studies in Hong Kong. Yeah? So if you go to Hong Kong today, he is still there, no longer at the University of Hong Kong, but at another Dhamma center. So Karunadasa tells us that if Buddhism is concerned with the problem of suffering, it is only in order to get rid of it completely. If Buddhism identifies all sources and occasions of suffering, it is in order to provide not a mere palliative, but a complete cure, which in turn ensures that happiness is based on a sure and solid foundation. Therefore, he says, the Buddhist teaching on suffering is the Buddhist teaching on the pursuit of happiness, right? So the transformation of suffering into happiness. The Buddhist teaching on suffering is the Buddhist teaching on the pursuit of happiness. So that's the second view. The first view by Wapola Sri Rahula, the second view by Karunadasa, and let us take a look at another view, and this time by Alexandra David Neal. Well, again, she has written many books on Buddhism, and one of the more famous ones is Buddhism, Its Doctrines and Its Methods. She lived from 1868 to 1969, and she's really a remarkable woman. Yeah, wow, 101 years old. She's her father is Belgian, and her mother is Belgian, and her father is French, a French explorer. She became a Buddhist writer at the age of 21. Yeah, and in those times, she's really quite remarkable. She visited India in 1912 to 1916. She visited Tibet in 1916, 1924, and was in Tibet during the time of the Second World War, right? So here you see herself dressed as a man, yeah, camouflage as a man visiting Tibet, and she adopted a Tibetan son, yeah, who unfortunately died before her. And after Tibet, she moved to France, where she spent most of her life. So she has written more than 30 books about her travels, about Asian religions and philosophy. And there's also a French movie made about her in 2012 about her lives. Yeah, so a very remarkable woman indeed. So in her book, Buddhism Doctrines and Methods, she refers to 4 possible attitudes towards suffering. So the first attitude is to deny suffering in the face of all evidence. So she calls this irrational, naive optimism. The second attitude towards suffering is one of passive resignation. It is the acceptance of a state of things which one considers inevitable, and this is pessimism. Yeah, nothing to do about it. We just accept it. Passive resignation, out and out pessimism. The third attitude of suffering, towards suffering that she refers to, is to camouflage suffering, right? By referring suffering to something else. Yeah. So camouflaging suffering, trying not to accept it as it is, but referring it to something else. And fourth attitude towards suffering is to see it as a war against suffering, something to do about suffering, right? And accompanied by the confidence in the possibility of overcoming suffering. So recognizing suffering for what it is and overcoming it. And she calls this the most rational and the most acceptable attitude to suffering. And this is the attitude of Buddhism towards suffering. Yeah. So to Alexandra David Neal, suffering should not be one of denial. Suffering should not be one of passive resignation. Suffering should not be camouflaged. Suffering should be recognized for what it is, and one should learn to overcome it. Yeah, this final attitude of suffering is the attitude of Buddhism. Okay, so we've talked about the first noble truth. We have talked about different aspects of it. We say that it is not pessimistic by looking at the views of 3 Buddhist scholars. And now let us move on to the next part, which is the 3 universal characteristics, because it is closely related to the first noble truth of suffering. The 3 universal characteristics is, of course, also a fundamental teaching in Buddhism. When we understand, practice, and realize these 3 universal characteristics, we are making headway in our spiritual practice. Now, what is a characteristic? Yeah, a characteristic is something that is necessarily connected with something else, and it tells us about the nature of that thing. So, for instance, heat is a characteristic of fire, but not of water. The characteristic of heat tells us what fire is and what to do with fire. The 3 characteristics, or the 3 marks of existence in Buddhism, we call them impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and not self, non-self, and that's anatta, or in Sanskrit is anatman. They are always present in or connected with existence. Yeah, they tell us about the nature of existence and help us know what to do with existence. So these 3 characteristics, or 3 marks of existence, we also call them the 3 seals of Dharma, in Chinese San Fa Yin, right? As a Dharma seal, it is present in all of Buddha's teachings. Yeah, in the Chinese context, right, when we use seals, seals is used to authenticate truth, isn't it? So the 3 Dharma seals, the 3 universal characteristics represent the truths, universal truths of existence. Now, as a result of understanding the 3 characteristics, we learn to develop generosity, detachment, renunciation, and eliminate our attachment to existence by eradicating delusion. Yeah, the misunderstanding that existence is permanent, pleasant, and has something to do with the self. Often, right? We live in this world thinking that existence is permanent, it is pleasant, and there is really a self. But the three universal characteristics tell us the other way. Yeah, all things are impermanent, unsatisfactory or suffering, and not self. And in doing so, we are therefore working our way towards the realization of Nibbana, right? If we understand, practice, and realize this understanding of the three universal truths, we are on our path towards realizing Nibbana. So of these three universal truths, today we will talk about impermanence and then suffering, and next week we will talk about not self. Okay, so let us move on to the first of the three characteristics, and that's impermanence. Buddhism teaches that change and impermanence are fundamental features of everything except Nibbana. It says whatever has the nature of arising, or that has the nature of ceasing. The world is impermanent, like autumn clouds. Birth and death are like a dance, and human life is like a flash of lightning or a waterfall. As one Buddhist discourse stresses, there's no moment, no instant, no particle of time when the river stops flowing. This illustrates the eternal flow of happening, the unbroken continuity of change, right? Waves come and go, rise and fall, contemplate impermanence. We go to the beach, and we see all this. If we think of a famous Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, he tells us the same thing, yeah? No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he is not the same man. So here, of course, mountains wear down, material goods wear out, or are lost or stolen. Nothing will last forever, not our apartment buildings, temples, rivers, islands, oceans, for all will eventually cease to exist. Contemplate impermanence. All beings, even gods, we age and die. The gross form, right, of our body changes relatively slowly, but the matter which composes our body is replaced as we eat, secrete, and shed skin cells. Yeah, we see our physical form, the gross form, slowly, of course, they change slowly over time. But if we look at it from a microscopic point of view, right, all our cells, they are changing constantly, yeah, rising and falling, dying and being born, regenerating all the time. Our mind, of course, our character patterns may be relatively persistent, but our feelings, moods, and thoughts constantly change. Yeah, within a day, we notice the constant changes in our thoughts, feelings, and moods. So this process of constant change, personal, impersonal, internal, and external, they occurs all the time, even without us noticing it. It affects every aspect of our lives, be it mental or material or physical, our relationships or our possessions. And impermanence is a fact that we can verify by direct, immediate observation. Okay, so the first universal characteristic of impermanence. And how do we apply impermanence in our daily life? Well, if we can understand impermanence, we can all understand that impermanence is important in our daily lives, right? If we think that, if we have the mindset that everything is fixed, artificial, unchanging, whether it's the people we come across, in our lives, the personalities of our friends or relatives, we will fail to develop our relations. Yeah. Because we fail to understand that all of us, change over time. Yeah. Our loved ones, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, people we know. Yeah. So in this case, right, is again, just look at this picture, right? It's just like waves are rising and falling. All of us, all the people around us, people we know, we are all always changing. So we must be open-minded. We must be flexible. We must be accommodating. We must be inclusive, right? We should not be narrow-minded, close-minded, be rigid, be judgmental in the ways we carry on in our daily lives. So having this understanding of impermanence about all things of life can encourage us to be open-minded, to be flexible, to be accommodating, to be inclusive. Now, of course, in our careers or public life, the same truth goes, the same thing happens. We cannot hope to succeed if we do not keep abreast of changing situations, such as new trends in our professions or disciplines. Well, we are all familiar, right? Industrialization, industrial revolutions, Industry 1.0, we think of the 19th century, starts off with mechanization, steam power, weaving a loom, right? Then over time, into the early 20th century, with Industry 2.0, mass production, assembly line, electrical energy. And then moving later into the 20th century, we move into automation, computers, and electronics. And of course, now we are in Industry 4.0, right? We talk about cyber physical systems, Internet of Things, networks. So all of us have to constantly upgrade ourselves. All of us have to always engage in lifelong learning. So impermanence, right? The impermanence of life tells us that this is actually this is our only imperative. And of course, our government always reminds us of that, right? Lifelong learning, the need to constantly upgrade ourselves. There's so many kinds of funds, right? To upgrade ourselves. All our local universities, now they have launched all kinds of courses so that all of us can move into this gear of lifelong learning. Therefore, whether in our personal or public lives, understanding impermanence is necessary if we are to be effective and creative in how we handle our personal and professional affairs. Yeah. So particularly when we live in an age of rapid globalization, of disruption technologies. Okay. So this understanding of impermanence is also a cure, an antidote to our attachment, craving, greed, to our ill will, aversion, anger. It is a key to understand the ultimate nature of things, the way things really are. So this too shall pass. When things are bad, remember, it won't always be this way. Take one day at a time. When things are good, remember, it won't always be this way. Enjoy every great moment. All right? So impermanence application in daily life. Another way is to remember death. Yeah, the Buddha always tells us, remember death. Because remembering death acts as a discouragement to our excessive attachment, to our ill will, right? It highlights, we know the insignificance of quarrels, of petty disagreements, of having enemies, right? When do we bother with all these quarrels, disagreements, enemies, right? If we constantly remember death, we all have short lives. Why don't we remember better things? Death can come anytime to any one of us. Why hold grudges? Why remind ourselves of unhappy events in the past, of quarrels, of disagreements, of unhappiness? We all know that death is absolutely certain. But the time of death is uncertain. We can die at any moment, like the bursting of a bubble of water. When we're born, right, upon our born, we move step by step towards death. Remembering this and remembering that at the time of death, wealth, family, and fame will also be of no use to us, we should therefore turn our minds to living life fully in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. We should take the opportunity, the conditions and opportunity to practice the Dharma. We should practice it quickly so as not to waste this opportunity and this precious human life. So at this picture, we see we begin all as children, of course, then we move on as we age along, and then one day, we come to the last frame in this picture. Well, life sucks, right? Aging, of course, we all try to age gracefully. I'm 60 years old, so I know what aging is like. As we age, we feel, our bodies and mind no longer as what it used to be. I still remember those prime times, the youth when I was in my national service. Wow, marathon, half marathon, no problem. Yeah, now I do Tai Chi. Yeah, I walk along the paths. I practice walking more than 10,000 steps a day. Yeah, that's what I do. Of course, I'm sure there are many people of my age or older who does much more active things. They still run. They are still very physical. They engage in all kinds of things. And of course, our government is also constantly exhorting us to age gracefully, right? Be physical and mentally fit, especially now all of us, in Singaporeans, we have a good life. We live longer, and it's important to live healthily in our old age, right? Okay, that's part of the aging process. And the Buddha also tells us that the trouble is we think we have time, right? Since death can come at any moment, we should not forget also to practice. Another way of remembering death is also to practice the 10 meditations on ugliness. Perhaps this is more relevant for us monastics here. When we have strong attachments, when we have lust, when we have attachments to the body, we remember the body in the 10 different stages of decomposition. Yeah, when we die as a corpse, right? We decompose, we decay, and with these 10 stages of the bloated, the livid, the festering, the cut up, the gnawed, the scattered, the hack, and the bleeding, the worm infested, and the skeleton. Yeah, so for monastics, when we have this lust coming up, we meditate on these 10 stages of the corpse, and then hopefully this can help us overcome our lust. And finally, seeing that all things are perishable, we also begin to see that things have no substantial existence of their own, that in our persons and in our persons and in the things around us, there's nothing like a self, nothing substantial, and hence impermanence also directly relates to the third universal characteristics of not self. Understanding impermanence is a key to understanding not self, and we will talk about not self next week. So we've covered the first universal characteristic of impermanence. Now let us briefly take a look at suffering in the context of impermanence. The Buddha said, what is impermanent is suffering. And what is suffering is not self. So whatever is impermanent is suffering because impermanence is an occasion for suffering. Yeah. So rather than a cause of suffering, impermanence is an occasion for suffering because there is suffering only if ignorance, craving, and clinging are present. Master Thich Nhat Hanh says it is not impermanence that makes us suffer. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. All right. So impermanence is an occasion for suffering because there's suffering only if ignorance, craving, and clinging are present. In our ignorance, we crave and cling to objects in the hope that they may be permanent, and in the hope that they may yield permanent happiness. But of course, in this way, we fail to understand that youth, health, and life itself are impermanent. We crave, we cling to them. When this occurs, impermanence is an occasion for suffering. Similarly, we fail to recognize the impermanent nature of possessions, power, and prestige, and so we crave and cling to them. When they end, impermanence is an occasion for suffering. Because as we all know, even those pleasant experiences we crave and cling to are impermanent. Impermanent is an occasion for suffering, and therefore whatever is impermanent is suffering. The Buddha teaches us when suffering arises, it arises within us. When it ceases, it also ceases within us. Thus, both samsara, right, our cycle of life and death, and nibbana are within us. You may have come across this famous teaching of the Buddha. The Buddha says, within this very body, mortal as it is, and only a fathom high, but conscious and endowed with a mind, is the world, and the waxing thereof, and the waning thereof, and the way that leads to the passing away thereof. Well, a simpler translation of this is, within this fathom-long sentient body itself, within this body, which is about 5 to 6 feet long, I postulate the world, right? I see the suffering. I postulate the arising of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. So the Buddha teaches, within this fathom-long sentient body itself, I postulate the world of suffering, the arising of the world, the arising of suffering, the cessation of the world, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of the world, the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay? So we have covered 2 of the 3 universal characteristics, impermanence and suffering. And now let us move on to the last part of our lecture, and that's looking at the teachings of Master Thich Nhat Hanh from his book, The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching, Transforming Suffering into Peace, Joy, and Liberation. It says people suffer because they're caught in their views. As soon as we release those views, we are free and we don't suffer anymore, right? When we talk about views, normally we are talking about views that are colored by the notion of self, right? Many of us, we are sort of have strong views which are colored by self, by our ego, by this concern for the self, by our egocentrism, by our egoism. So as long as such views persist, of course, we suffer. And once we can let go of such views, we don't suffer anymore. So suffering and its application in daily life, Master Thich Nhat Hanh says, when we recognize and acknowledge our own suffering, the Buddha, which means the Buddha in us, will look at it, discover what has brought it about, and prescribe a course of action that can transform it into peace, joy, and liberation. Okay, when we recognize and acknowledge our own suffering, we here talking about the Buddha nature in us. We look at it, we look at what suffering has, what has brought suffering about. We look at the action that can transform suffering, and then we pursue this action. Then we have peace, joy, and liberation. So he says, when we learn how to suffer, we suffer much less. We've looked at the 3 different kinds of dukkha. The First Noble Truth, yes, it's suffering, but when we learn how to approach suffering, all of us will suffer less because we can transform suffering into peace, joy, happiness, and ultimate liberation. Okay? So suffering is the means the Buddha used to liberate himself. It is also the means by which we can become free. The ocean of suffering is immense, but if we turn around, we can see the land. Yeah. So the ocean of suffering is immense, but if we turn around, we can see the land. The seed of suffering in us may be strong, but don't wait until we have no more suffering before allowing ourselves to be happy. So every moment in our life, yeah, we can transform every moment of suffering into peace, calm, and happiness. Well, Master Ting Han goes on to say, without suffering, we cannot grow. Without suffering, we cannot get the peace and joy we deserve. So please do not run away from our suffering. Embrace our suffering and cherish our suffering with understanding and compassion. We will be able to heal the wounds in our heart and the wounds in the world. Okay, so do not run away from suffering. Embrace it, cherish it. Yeah, with understanding, with compassion, we can heal whatever wounds we have, and we can heal the wounds also in our world. So most people are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus flower without the mud. Well, the Buddha also called suffering a holy truth because our suffering has the capacity of showing us the path to liberation. Yeah. So embrace our suffering and let it reveal to us the way to peace. Don't throw away or deny our suffering. Touch our suffering, face it directly. If we have experienced hunger, Master Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, we know that having food is a miracle. If we have suffered from the cold, we know the preciousness of warmth. When we have a toothache, we know that not having a toothache is happiness. When we have suffered, we know how to appreciate the elements of paradise that are paradise. So suffering is not enough. Life is both dreadful and wonderful. How can I smile when I'm filled with so much sorrow? It is natural. We need to smile to our sorrow because we're more than our sorrow, right? With the Buddha nature in us, we have the capacity, yeah, to always transform every moment of our suffering into every moment of calm, peace, and happiness. So just experiencing suffering itself is not enough. We must know how to transform our suffering to calm, peace, and happiness. Practicing mindfulness helps us to appreciate the well-being that is already there. With mindfulness, we can be grateful and treasure our happiness more fully. Learn the art of cultivating joy. Well, we're very good at preparing to live, but not very good at living. We know how to sacrifice 10 years for a diploma, and we're willing to work very hard to get a job, a car, a house, and so on. But we have difficulty remembering that we are alive in the present moment, the only moment that is for us to be alive. Perhaps for Singaporeans, right? We are all caught up very much so in the rat race. Yeah? We are always constantly exhorted to improve ourselves all the time. Yeah, so we're very good at all these things, but we must always remember that we should not just be planning for the future. Yeah, we must always also be living in the moments of our life as we plan for the future. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with planning, right? But do not just focus on planning for the future, but live every moment of our life as it is. Practicing, so through this we practice mindfulness, just like earlier on when we begin our meditation. We started off with calm, tranquility meditation to calm us, and then we move on to mindfulness and meditation. That's through this practice we can learn to be mindful of every moment, and if we can be mindful of every moment, we can also attain calm, peaceful, and happiness every moment. So do not ignore our suffering, but do not forget to enjoy the wonders of life for our sake and for the benefit of many beings. Even while we have pain in our heart, we can enjoy the many wonders of life, the beautiful sunset, the smile of a child, the many flowers and trees. Do not be imprisoned by our suffering. Life is filled with suffering, but it is also filled with many wonders like the blue sky. Do we need to make a special effort to enjoy the beauty of the blue sky? Do we have to practice to be able to enjoy it? No, we just enjoy it. Each second, each minute of our lives can be like this. So if we practice mindfulness, every second, every minute of our lives can be like this. So these are some of Master Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on suffering and how we can apply in daily life. Now, let us take a look at his teachings on impermanence and how we can apply in daily life, right? Remember, impermanence and suffering, two universal characteristics that we have talked about. Well, if we see impermanence as merely a philosophy, it is not the Buddha's teaching. Every time we look or listen, the object of our perception can reveal to us the nature of impermanence. We should nourish in our insight into impermanence all day long. Once we recognize that all things are impermanent, we have no problem enjoying them. In fact, real peace and joy are only possible when we see clearly into the nature of impermanence. Understanding impermanence can give us confidence, peace, and joy. Without impermanence, life could not be. Impermanence is what makes transformation possible. Without impermanence, we could not grow from a baby to an adult. What makes us suffer is wanting things to be permanent when they are not. So because suffering is impermanent, that is why we can transform it. Because happiness is impermanent, that is why we have to nourish it. So understand impermanence, and we can transform suffering into happiness. Understand impermanence, we can nourish happiness whenever we experience happiness. We need to learn to appreciate the value of impermanence. If we are in good health and are aware of impermanence, we will take good care of ourselves. When we know the person we love is impermanent, we will cherish our beloved all the more. Impermanence teaches us to respect and value every moment and all the people and things around us and inside of us. Okay, so learn to appreciate the value of impermanence. Do not take our good health for granted, right? If we take our good health for granted, we do not do anything to maintain our health, then our health will go more rapidly than we think. So understanding impermanence encourages us to take good care of ourselves. When we know that people we love are impermanent, we should cherish all the more, right? All the time that we have with them. And thereby, right? Impermanence teaches us to respect, to value every moment, and to value all the people and things around us and inside of us. So nothing is more precious than being in the present moment, fully alive, fully aware. When we are mindful of the present moment, we're fully mindful of our own body and mind. We're fully mindful of the people around us. We are fully mindful of all the experiences that we come into contact with. We are therefore fully alive. We are fully aware, and we can experience the very life of that moment. Yeah? And that brings us calm, peace, and happiness. If we practice the art of mindful living, when things change, we will not have any regrets. We can smile because we've done our best to enjoy every moment of our life and to make others happy. Yeah? If we practice the art of mindful living, when things change, we will not have any regrets. We can smile because we've done our best to enjoy every moment of our life and to make others happy. Just like this pair of cuddly bears, right? Panda bears. Today's newspapers. We can continue to have our panda bears for another few more years. Yeah, thanks to the generosity of China. Well, when we get into an argument with someone we love, please close our eyes and visualize ourselves 300 years from now on. Yeah, doesn't matter. When we open our eyes, we will only want to take each other in our arms and acknowledge how precious each of us is, right? So again, whenever we are in the frame of mind holding grudges, recalling unhappy events, why our friends, why our loved ones are creating all these problems for us, imagine 100 years from now, will we still be thinking of these things? Forget about them, right? Let go. And the teaching of impermanence helps us appreciate fully what is there. Without attachment or forgetfulness, when we practice mindfulness of impermanence, we become fresher and more loving. We're entering the heart of the Buddha, right? So, teachings of Master Thich Nhat Hanh from the heart of the Buddha's teaching, transforming suffering into peace, joy, and liberation. So let us recall what we have covered this evening. We started off with a brief introduction. Then we move on to take a look at the Four Noble Truths in terms of its significance in Buddhism, from suffering to happiness. Why Noble Truths? Cause and effect, medicine analogy, disease, diagnosis, cure and treatment, progressive sequence, these 5 aspects. We'll look at the first noble truth in terms of the truth of suffering, dukkha as ordinary suffering, consisting of physical and bodily suffering, and mental and psychological suffering, dukkha as produced by change, dukkha as conditions and conditioned states. We ask the question, does the truth of suffering suggest that Buddhism is pessimistic? We look at the views of 3 Buddhist scholars and they tell us no. Well, we've looked at the 3 universal characteristics, starting off with impermanence, application in daily life, how remembering death may help, and how practicing the 10 meditations on ugliness may help, particularly for monastics when we have when we have lust coming up. We talk about suffering. Then finally, we end with entering the heart of the Buddha, transforming suffering into peace, joy, and liberation, the teachings of Master Thich Nhat Hanh. Suffering, how to apply in daily life. Impermanence, how to apply in daily life. And that leaves us maybe about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A, if any one of you has any questions. I'm always fine if you have no questions, right? So no need to stress yourself by thinking of questions if you really don't have questions, yeah? Only if you have questions. And if we don't have questions, we can always practice more mindfulness and then close it with puja, yeah? So just relax, yeah? Don't feel stressed to ask questions. But if you have questions, yeah, of course, yeah, just feel free to ask. I may not know the answers. Maybe some of you know the answers better than I do. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. If any of you have any question to ask the Venerable, you can unmute yourself and ask Venerable directly, or you can choose to send your question in the Zoom chat.
Okay. Yeah, so that I can see the chat box if there's any, or just feel free to ask questions. And again, if you do not have questions, do not stress yourself, right? Do not force yourself to ask questions. We can just practice a few minutes of meditation if you think that that's that may be good, especially just before we sleep, right? Meditation is supposed to do wonders. Okay, again, not to worry. Yeah, tell me, yeah, if you prefer to practice a few more minutes of meditation, we can all do so. Shall we do that? Yeah, okay, that's good. Let me turn to the share screen. Okay. Okay, so yeah, let us be happy and practice, right? Let us transform every moment of suffering, whatever suffering that we have, and into happiness. Again, so maybe about 10 minutes or so. Again, just relax. Yeah. Now, after listening to about 90 minutes of this talk, you may be really suffering. Yeah. So unwind yourself, relax. Don't think anymore about the lecture or the talk. Just unwind yourselves, relax, feel happy, close your eyes again if you wish to. Yeah, adopt a comfortable position. Remind yourself to straighten your back. Yeah, to be upright but not uptight. Again, imagine a string on top of your head pulling you up. Roll back your shoulders, align your ears and shoulders, and just relax. Yeah, you can gently open your eyes, or if you feel sleepy, you can, of course, open your eyes or half open, half close your eyes in Zen meditation, right? Usually it's half open, half close. In the more normal meditation, it's usually to close our eyes because that it's easier to not to have distractions. And I think in some Tibetan practices, right? We open our eyes to be fully alive when we meditate. Yeah, so do whatever you are comfortable with. And again, let's go back to our object of meditation, breathing. Yeah, after listening, your breaths may be a little bit sort of disrupted. So get back to your natural rhythm of breathing. Yeah, just naturally. Do not force yourself. Just be very gentle on yourself. Yeah, it's already 9:10. Yeah, we are about to prepare to sleep. Yeah, so do not exert too much effort. Yeah, meditation is not about exerting energy, right? It is actually to relax. Somehow Singaporeans always find it difficult to relax. Yeah, I remember going for meditation retreats, and in Myanmar or in Thailand, the meditation masters also say Singaporeans hard time relaxing. But meditation is about relaxing. It's not about attaining anything. Yeah, we're not out there to achieve any goal. Yeah, so just relax and experience the moment. Remember, we're practicing calm meditation, tranquility meditation, when we focus on one object, just the breath. Okay? How nice our breath is, how gentle our breath is, how precious our breath is. For without our breath, we cannot be alive. Yeah? So let's appreciate our breath by not taking it for granted. Now, let's just notice our breath. Appreciate our breaths. Just observe it. Its nature, its qualities, whatever it is. Yeah, just let it be. Do not control it. Do not force it. Just let it be. Let go and just let it be. Okay, now let's practice, body scanning, another way of mindfulness or body practice, body scanning, by scanning our body gently from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet. Our scanning can be done in 3 parts. First, the upper body, which is the top of the head, eyes, nose, mouth, ears, face, neck, shoulders, elbows, fingertips. Then we can move on to the middle body, chest, heart, lungs, stomach, liver, kidneys, intestines, top of our back to the tip of our back, and then lower body, buttocks, thighs, legs, feet. So let us begin scanning our body, starting from the top, the upper body, top of our head. So gently bring our focus from the breath to the top of the head. Tell ourselves, relax. Relax all the cells on the top of our head. Smile to all the cells at the top of our head. And let go of everything. Let go as much as we can. Again, focus gently on the top of our head. Relax. Smile. Let go. Let's move our focus to our eyes. Again, relax all the cells of our eyes. Smile to them. Appreciate our eyes, we're always making use of them, right, throughout the day. Smile, thank you. Let go. Gently focus on our eyes. Relax. Smile. Let go. And then to our nose, we're grateful to our nose too. Relax all the cells, smile at them, let go of whatever troubles that we have. Just be grateful. Our ears, our nose, our mouth, from the head to our eyes to our nose. Now move on to our mouth. Our mouth must be tired, right? We talk all the time. Coming to bed soon. Relax all the cells of our mouth. Smile, let go. From our mouth to our ears, Oh, poor you, listening to me for 90 minutes, let your ears have a rest. Relax, smile, let go. From your ears to your face, the whole of your face, relax all the cells on your face. Smile. Let go. From the face, let's move to our neck. Relax all the cells there. Smile. Let go, right? The neck plays a very important role supporting our head. Now relax all the cells, all the muscles there. Smile, let go. From the neck to our shoulders, whole day, right? Our shoulders must be tired by now. Relax our shoulders, all the muscles, all the cells. Smile, let go. From the shoulders to our elbows, relax all the cells, all the muscles, all the tissues from our shoulder to our elbows. Smile, let go. And now from our elbows to our fingertips, everything between our elbows and fingertips, relax all our cells, muscles, tissues. Smile, let go. Okay, we've relaxed the upper part. Now let's move on to scan the middle body. Yeah. Let's begin by gently focusing now on our chest. Our chest, the area of our chest. Relax all the cells, all the muscles there, all the tissues there. Smile. Let go. Chest. Relax. Smile. Let go. Let's move on to our heart. Yeah, so important, right? Our heart beats, makes life possible. Relax. All the tissues, cells, muscles of the heart. Smile to our heart. Thank you very much. We're so grateful to you. Let go. From our heart to our lungs. Yeah, breathing, right? So important. You've worked very hard. Let's relax. All the muscles, tissues, cells of the lungs. Smile. Let go. From the lungs to the stomach. Relax. Yeah, stomach has been working very hard. Singaporeans, right? We love food. Stomach. Relax. Smile. Let go. And moving on to the liver, our liver. Relax all the tissues, all the cells. Smile. Let go. From the liver to our kidneys, all our organs working very hard, non-stop, yeah? Thank you. Let's relax now. Smile. Let go. From the kidneys to the intestines, all the digestion that is going on. Relax now. Smile. Let go. Okay, from the front of our middle body, let us move on to the back, beginning with the top of our back, and then moving downward to the tip of our back. So let's move our attention, scan our back, top of our back to the tip of our back. Supporting our whole body, right? Very important, the back. Relax all the tissues, all the muscles, all the cells there, from the top to the tip of the back. Relax. Smile. Let go. Relax. Smile. And let go. So we have scanned, been mindful and relaxed our upper body, our middle body, and now finally our lower body. Let's move our focus to our buttocks, sitting all the time for this session. Yeah. Terrible, poor buttocks. Let's relax now. Smile. Let go. Buttocks, relax. Smile. Let go. Let's focus on our thighs. Very important, yeah? Thighs. Working very hard too. Let's be grateful. Let them take a rest. Relax all the cells, muscles, tissues. Smile. And let go. Relax. Smile. Let go. Now our legs also. Working very hard for us the whole day, standing, walking, running, whatever that we do, supporting us. Relax all the muscles, tissues, cells. Smile. Let go. And finally, our feet, yeah? Relax. Smile. Let go. Okay. Our feet, relax, smile, let go. Okay, so we have completed one round of body scanning. Gently open your eyes. I hope you feel more relaxed. You know, as you lie in bed when you're about to sleep, if you find you have some difficulty sleeping, instead of counting sheep, you may want to focus on your breath, or you may want to do body scanning, from top to bottom. Okay, and of course, when we talk about mindfulness, we also talk about mindfulness of the 4 postures. You can be mindful. Yeah, we can all be mindful of our postures of walking, standing, sitting, and lying down just before we sleep. Okay, I think we are about time. We're done. We should now get back to the closing puja.